Florina. First I was over in your workroom, dear father friend, and because you were not there, so I come to the living room. However, greetings to you. Billy. Also be greeted, but you surprise me, but be welcome anyway. I am glad to have you back. Florina. It is my job to represent everyone and do their jobs. Ta, Bermunda and Yanarara will be unavailable to come here for 9 days due to special matters, so I will come here and inform you. But I would be more comfortable if we could go to your workroom. Billy. Of course, you can. It also works that way, here we are. It really is easier that way. Florina. Yes. Billy. Well. It's a good thing you came here though, because otherwise I would have called and asked for Ta, because I wanted to talk to him about some things and also tell him about all the strange things that happened this morning and everything else. Florina. Billy. It was really extraordinary. Besides, I want to know something I have wanted to ask Ta for a long time, because as a doctor he knows about these things that relate to what I'm about to ask him. Florina. We are all medically educated, consequently you can also ask me. However, what you call a doctor is unknown to us, because this earthly designation does not include what concerns our medical education. This is much more comprehensive than what an earthly doctor has to learn. Billy. I know that, but I am a human being of the earth and I need terms that I use practically all the time. But what I really did not know is that you also have this extensive training in medicine. Florina. Oh, I should have known that. Excuse me for my lecture. Billy. There is no need for an apology, you could not have known that. Florina. Yes, I really was not aware of it. But what I want to tell you is that as a deputy, I am really well informed about everything that concerns our activities on Earth. Billy. Also regarding the foreigners and their work? Florina. Also regarding them and the working, as you call it. Why do you ask? Billy. As I was looking at the moon outside the house at 7:20 HRS today, I observed something that was really very unusual, namely that a foreign flying apparatus passed by at the same time as a passenger plane heading east, which must also have been observed from the plane. About 20 minutes later, the flying object passed by again, but this time from south to north, where it suddenly disappeared, however, and it was observed by Barbara when it suddenly appeared far to the south from the northern flying point and flew away. Barbara was still able to capture it on the film of her camera, but it was barely recognizable. Florina. I also observed that, because I was already in the airspace above the center when you stepped in front of the house at 5 o'clock and obviously also looked at the moon and the shining planet, and afterwards went back into the house and lay down again to rest. That is why I continued to wait and also watched as the foreign object flew around high above the center. But it was not the foreign ones, it was flying objects completely unknown to me, which is something I have to keep a low profile from anyway. However, why I was here for so long, that is based on the order of Quetzal, who along with you. Billy. Good, then I do not have to ask you if you are oriented about what happened with us, when on the 10th, the Andreas then reported that Quetzal has consequently together with me. Furthermore, Michael and Christian then tried with a drone. But it was on the one hand in the wrong place, and on the other hand it turned out that. Florina. I am aware of all that. But what I should tell you and inform you is that a new official regulation is being prepared in Switzerland in such a way that in the future the flying of so-called drones will be subject to authorization, even on one's own land. In addition, the flying altitude of these flying apparatuses is also to be determined, meaning that an altitude of just over 100 meters will again require a special permit. Billy. That has to come inevitably, because the whole thing of flying drones is becoming dangerous, also espionage is being carried out with it, and also privately and so, as we ourselves have already had experience with it. Florina. Yes, I was also told that, namely, that, as we were able to fathom during investigations. Billy. Exactly. Florina. It is unbelievable what is happening on Earth by human beings out of unreason, revenge and hatred, falsehood, lies and slander and other stupidity, etc. It even makes me disgust and dislike those human beings. I am disgusted and reluctant with those leaders in Switzerland who betray their own country, which has committed itself to neutrality, but which has been rashly, shamefully and irresponsibly broken by the application of sanctions by the European Union and against Russia. It further threatens that Switzerland should maneuver with a murderous organization called NATO with a so-called cooperative neutrality, not considering that this makes Switzerland's neutrality null and void, because such action and doing is completely contrary to neutrality. A human being, and one who is supposed to be a head of state but obviously is not, never belongs in such an office. Moreover, it is inevitable that in the course of time such a maneuver alliance with NATO will lead to a membership alliance with NATO. This would then mean that Switzerland would have to participate in military warfare with NATO. Human beings, however, who advocate such a request are in any way unfit for a major or minor office of state leadership, as they should never be elected to such an office anyway. On the other hand, if such nonsense appears in a leader, he or she must be immediately removed from his or her position and must never be reinstated to any office. What is also worth mentioning is the incompetence of the leaders and supporters of the peoples who thoughtlessly and without judgment support the arms supplies and financial donations for the Zelensky war being waged in Ukraine, which is in fact being conducted under the direction of America. This war would never have come about if America, as the secret leader of NATO, had not provoked the whole thing to such an extent that Russia's patience broke and had triggered the war. And on the other hand, this war would have ended in a short time if the sheer stupidity of the leaders and many populations of various states had not found it necessary to supply weapons and aid to Zelensky and had not behaved amicably towards this war criminal. Today, they are involved in a world war that has never taken place in this way before, but in reality it is a world war that is not only being waged by Ukraine by Zelensky, but by all those who supply weapons, which allows this war to continue. All those who supply weapons, who help Zelensky and who are pro-America, are helping to make reality what America wants, namely to continue the war until everything is finally under its control. On the one hand, this war is fueled by the power-hungry war criminal Zelensky, who in turn is led in the background by America, which wants the war to be prolonged, which also succeeds by America releasing endless new financial resources to once again supply weapons to Zelensky. The fact that America is getting more and more into debt and driving its own country to ruin is not taken into account, nor is the fact that the people are slowly but surely falling more and more into misery and hardship as a result. Those of the American people and their descendants, however, who put up with everything or go along with it and are of the same mind as the state leadership and its dark leadership that controls everything in the background, are without doubt the ones who will suffer in the future. They are the culprits of what the future will bring in the way of unpleasantness. It is they who, with their attitude and their adherence to the hostile mood against Russia, are prolonging the Ukraine war and, with their artificially created hatred of Russia, are almost beguiling the whole world and fomenting general discord among all the peoples of Earth. This is not really about Ukraine, but about imposing America's hegemony. Ukraine is only a means to an end in order to gain more and more world domination, to which the stupid of the world's population contribute everything so that this succeeds. These stupid people do not realize that America is behind the discord against Russia, which is why the war criminal Zelensky, who is in America's service in a strange way and who is in bondage as well as greedy for power himself, is doing exactly what will not let the war end. The stupidity of those, moreover, who are incapable of comprehending anything of truth, are welcome helpers and supply weapons with which disaster is brought upon Ukraine and Russia, with the Russian state being equally affected by the war. This state can also be blamed for the death, misery and disaster spread by the war, which is uncontrollably rampant, because an act of war can never be excused, not even in this case, because Russia was provoked by America for so long that Putin, impatient, triggered the war, which is now costing many human lives and causing destruction that can never be repaired in its entirety. So Russia is not acting any better than the scheming America, which can be described as the real steering of NATO, which is also the real profiteer of the war machinations, as well as the murder machinations and the torture machinations, as well as the war atrocities of NATO its completely dehumanized creatures who are involved. If everything is looked at closely, then there is no difference to what all took place in the last World War, both by the Nazis, the Americans and all others involved in it, as it also happened in Vietnam, Korea and Iraq and in every other war by the respective war participants. Many private individuals also took advantage of this to murder even hated family members or acquaintances with impunity, for whatever reason, in order to take revenge, to satisfy themselves or to enrich themselves, with impunity, because everything could be blamed on the murdering and massacring military. And also thousands of assassinations murders go unpunished every year, committed for the sake of profit and inheritance or hatred as well as for the sake of enmity, and to which, depending on the state, hundreds or thousands of human beings fall victim, without it ever being known that these are murders. According to our findings, this happens on average 400 times a year in the so-called civilized world, with a population of about 8.7 million, which therefore increases with a higher population. However, this is never officially known, because in such deaths it is regularly unintentionally not truthfully investigated by coroners what the dead in question really died of.
Billy. It takes time and money to find out, which is probably the reason why not every death is thoroughly investigated unless age or illness indicates that this is the true cause of death. What I want to say, however, is that the human being always wants to be better than he really is, so he immediately lets his deepest character traits run free, and work outwardly without restraint as soon as something comes over his liver that does not suit him, or he is misled by lies and slander. Depending on this, hatred, revenge, lies, slander, murder and manslaughter or other evil that is deposited in the deepest character immediately take place, and that is when something excites the mind, then everything that is deposited deep in the character is released uncontrollably and let outwards, and then the catastrophe happens. Florina. That is unfortunately so, but through effectual thinking it can be learned that on the one hand the bad and evil qualities that are deeply deposited in the character can be mastered and thus controlled, or even made void and thus dissolved. Billy. Yes, that is indeed how it is. But something else, do you know anything regarding the Whimsun Cave? Florina. No. Billy. That's a pity, because I was there with Svoth in the 1940s. He taught me a course there about early humans, and I would have had a question about that now. But that's unnecessary because you do not know this cave. But something else again, if you are medically educated, just like all of you, as you said, then perhaps you can answer a question for me that I asked a long time ago. Florina. Of course. Billy. It is about how and why Alzheimer's dementia actually develops. If you can answer that. Florina. This disease is congenital. On Earth, unfortunately, it is rampant like a plague and is not curable yet. I have to explain. To explain the whole thing, I have to mention earthly terms that are familiar to me because I also follow earthly medicine. Alzheimer's dementia is protracted and drags on for many years until it really appears openly, so it can take 80 years or more until it becomes acute. Then, however, forgetfulness comes quickly, occurring in 3 phases. At some point it begins with the human being's personal behavior appearing strange, which also becomes noticeable to the outside world. Over many years and decades, Alzheimer's dementia creeps into the human beings, because the disease does not come quickly, but very slowly and only imperceptibly. For years and even decades, the human beings themselves do not notice when they are affected. Then, little by little, the first signs appear in the form of memory lapses, which are usually judged to be harmless, but which increase in number and gradually make the human beings unsteady and somehow erratic. They become more and more forgetful and can no longer find their daily utensils. Over time, they get tangled up in the middle of speech, and can no longer finish what they have started to say. In this way, the human beings become unable to read anything completely or to concentrate on anything. As the Alzheimer's disease progresses, the abilities relevant to everyday life are lost more and more, with the focus on personal hygiene and food intake. Over time, the human beings become dependent on the help of other human beings to get around and to do everything else. Alzheimer's dementia has a very long asymptomatic phase, which begins as a small child and thus long before adulthood, before the first symptoms even appear. With very close professional observation, the first indications of changes in the direction of Alzheimer's can be detected as early as puberty. This is also the case when amyloidosis skin spots appear and become visible. These are abnormally folded proteins that cluster together and are deposited in the tissue as amyloids, a so-called protein polysaccharide complex. The asymptomatic phase can last for many years, but during this time characteristic biological features and changes in the brain are already recognizable and can be detected. After the asymptomatic phase, the so-called predementia phase begins. This becomes noticeable in daily life from time to time through occasional cognitive failures, such as abilities, attention, memory, learning, creativity, planning, orientation, imagination, reasoning, introspection, will, faith, and much more. People with Alzheimer's disease are less able to retain new information, which can take years, during which time a significant decrease in brain mass in the hippocampus can be observed. The progression of Alzheimer's dementia in 3 stages thus once triggers cognitive disturbances such as forgetfulness in everyday life, which have a very clear disturbing effect on human beings, over a period of at least half a year. In the early stages, there are slight cognitive impairments, so the ability to remember is reduced, as is concentration. Often, there is a feeling of getting lost or desperately searching for certain words in the middle of a sentence. In addition, the first problems with orientation appear, especially in foreign surroundings. It is not uncommon for human beings in this stage of Alzheimer's dementia to appear very depressed, because they react to their change with fear, grief, and shame. For this reason, it is often difficult to distinguish symptomatically between Alzheimer's in the early stages and psychological damage in the form of depression. Even if the disease is detected early, there is no way to do anything about it. Alzheimer's cannot be cured with current earthly medicine for a long time, but the whole course of the disease and its progression can be delayed by appropriate cognitive and psychomotor therapy. Earth humans affected by Alzheimer's can train their coordination and perception, as well as their balance, in the early stages, so that their symptoms can be kept quite stable for years. Alzheimer's dementia has its origins in the fact that the brain of human beings begins before birth with a very protracted process of a cell disease that is very difficult to detect, which then over time practically inevitably triggers a degradation of cell structures. So the cell degradation does not take place only when the human being grows older, but already before birth, because the actual beginning already takes place in the womb. However, earthly science is not yet able to fathom this, because it still lacks any possibility of doing so. That is what I may say without violating our directives. Billy. That is more than I expected by way of explanation. As I understand it, about the same thing of speech difficulty occurs in Alzheimer's as after a stroke, right? It's just that with Alzheimer's nothing can be undone, whereas with a brain stroke everything can be relearned. Florina. You are talking about you and your brain stroke. Billy. You also notice everything. Yes, my question or observation was about that. Florina. That's what I thought, yes. But you have already learned a lot, because your language is remarkably good again, even if you sometimes have lapses and cannot find the correct words. As I have often noticed, the group members are not bothered by this, but stand by you and say what you cannot pronounce at the moment. Everyone is very attentive and helps you a lot in this regard. Billy. Which I am really grateful for. In fact, it would be harder for me to be able to express myself verbally again. Florina. That is so, of course. Now Ta asked me if maybe you could put in writing what he is interested in, regarding witchcraft. Billy. I can do that, and I will do it for him, and get it ready to be copied. Florina. Thank you. Then I have some things to discuss with you that are of a private nature, and that will not be mentioned in the conversation report. If you